Are you considering taking advantage of the housing market and selling your home? Well, in today's video, we're going to discuss 5 mistakes I see sellers make all the time when putting their homes on the market. Some of these mistakes actually cost the sellers a lot of money. We're going to talk about each one of these. We're going to talk about what you can do as a seller to maximize profit and also keep the most money in your pocket. My name is Jeb Smith. I'm a real estate broker here in Southern California. My channel is all about real estate, helping guide buyers, helping guide sellers through the real estate process. Do me a favor, if you find any value in this content at all, hit that thumbs up, give us a subscribe if you want to stay updated on everything real estate related. As a real estate agent for nearly 20 years, I've worked with a lot of sellers during that time. And one of the most common questions I get from sellers is asking me whether or not they should do a bunch of repairs prior to listing their home. And as an experienced agent, I feel like it is a mistake to have a seller go out and do a bunch of repairs up front. Now, you're probably thinking, Jeb, you're crazy. That's the way to maximize the price. Get everything perfectly dialed in. Everything's in working order. When a buyer comes through, they do the home inspection, nothing shows up. It's absolutely perfect. As I said, I've been doing this nearly 20 years. I've never seen a home inspection not come back with a laundry list of items. Now, most of those items are cosmetic, nothing serious, but at the end of the day, items do come up. And what I see happen more often than not is sellers want to do a lot of things that they see wrong with the property. Because you live in the property, because you see these things all the time, they're things that stand out to you, and you feel like they need to be corrected. But most buyers walking through property don't notice these little items. A lot of times you're spending money on things that buyers don't care about. And what I don't want you to do as a seller is spend a bunch of money on repairs that buyers at the end of the day don't even notice or weren't going to ask you to repair to begin with. They're going to do a home inspection, and that home inspection is likely going to bring back a list of items. Even if you've gone through the property and done a list of repairs, that home inspection is going to bring back items. Now, they're going to request the items that are important to them. Now, perhaps you went through and did a bunch of repairs up front, and say you spent a couple $1,000. Say you spent $2,000 on repairs up front. Well, what happens when the buyer goes through the property, makes a list of items, and now there's more repairs they want completed? Now, you can always go back and negotiate and say that you don't want to do them, or you could just save your money up front, not spend money on frivolous repairs and wait to see what the buyer comes back with. Most of the time, at least in my experience, a deal's not going to fall apart because of what comes up in the home inspection, especially if they're little, small items. Typically, if a deal falls apart, it's because of bigger items. And if you already had in your mind that you were willing to spend maybe a couple of $1,000s on repairs, then you can use that money towards the buyer's repairs, maybe towards a negotiation with the buyer to work on those repairs versus doing them up front. Now, I will say on the other side of things, if it's things that are cosmetic, maybe you want to paint the house to make it look fresh or clean the carpets or something like that, in many cases that money is well spent. But what I wouldn't do is go out spending money on repairs that bother you, because at the end of the day, they may not bother the buyer, and it's money wasted if the buyer was never going to ask for those to start. The second thing I'm going to talk about kind of goes hand in hand with the first, and that is doing a bunch of upgrades to a property prior to putting it on the market. Now, I often have sellers ask me, what can I spend money on? Should I redo the kitchen? Should I redo the bathrooms? Should I replace the carpet with new flooring or new carpet in order to get it ready to sell? And in some cases, the answer is yes, but what you don't want to do as a seller is go through and put your taste on a bunch of upgrades through the home. You don't want to start spending money on things that may not appeal to the buyer coming in on that property. In some cases, the carpet needs to be replaced, or the flooring needs to be replaced, or maybe the property needs to be painted, and you go through and you do it, and what the buyer's thinking when they walk through the property is, I need to repaint this property, I need new flooring, I need whatever it is, even after you've gone and replaced it. So oftentimes, your taste for redoing these upgrades in a property isn't the same for a buyer. And so if you price it accordingly to start, then chances are you're still going to get a solid offer, and not have to spend money up front in order to do those repairs. Now, you're actually in a housing market at the moment where sellers are actually maximizing price without having to do a bunch of upgrades. So make sure you're working with a professional, having that conversation and asking them, what should be done versus going out to begin with, spending a lot of money on things that might not be necessary. The third thing I want to talk about today, and this is often a fight with sellers in many cases, and that is not staging the home. As a seller, especially if you have a vacant property, many times it makes sense to spend the money to stage a property. Why? Because staging helps buyers see the room with furniture in it. It helps them picture where their furniture would go. Oftentimes it might hide blemishes in property, right? If a property is vacant, buyers walk through it, they notice every little nook and cranny of the property. They notice, the baseboards and whatever it is on a property versus it being furnished. It's not that you're hiding things, but it just helps the buyer look at the room as a whole versus nitpicking small things that might not be a problem to start. And in many cases, buyers don't have the eye to picture where their furniture would go. And so, if a room is small or misshaped, often they struggle with putting the furniture in the right places, and doing staging up front helps the buyer see it from a perspective of an interior decorator. In many cases, helps maximize the space, and at the end of the day will net you more money. Fourth thing I want to talk about is shooting for the moon on price. Now, I realize it's a seller's market, there's low inventory, there's very high buyer demand, but as a seller, you don't want to shoot for the moon on price. You want to price your home fair and reasonable based on other comparable sales in the neighborhood. Why? Because if you're competitive in the neighborhood and there's not a lot of inventory out there, chances are your property is going to get bid up above that price to start. But if you shoot too high to start with, there's a very good chance your property is going to sit. And the longer your home sits on the market, buyers think one of two things. One, either the home is overpriced, or two, there's something wrong with it. So while it is a seller's market, it still makes more sense to be competitive on price it closer to fair market value versus trying to stretch it, even though you might have a unique property, even though your home might be a lot nicer than the last one sold. Buyers realize it in many cases that, when a home is nicer than others that have sold, if it's priced similar to what those have sold at, they realize that next home, your home may actually sell for more. And if you price it correctly, chances are you're going to get multiple offers in that case and potentially bid that home up to above where it would have sold to start with. So if you're a seller, just make sure you're pricing it fair and reasonable to start with versus shooting for the moon. And that's going to lead me into my last thing, which is sellers not being fair and reasonable in this market. Even though it's a seller's market, even though you have leverage as a seller, it makes more sense as a seller to work with the buyer that's in escrow, right? In many cases, what I'm seeing is sellers feel like because they have the upper hand, they don't have to negotiate. They don't have to work with the buyer. They don't have to give up anything in order to make the transaction work. And at the end of the day, you don't. But remember, time is money, and deals falling out of escrow, deals going back on the market could impact you, right? You could end up not selling your property for the same price that you went into escrow to start with, could end up taking longer, and the longer it stays on the market, chances are there are things that you have to pay, like a mortgage, like taxes on that home. So if you're a seller, I'm not telling you that you should bend over backwards for a buyer, but at the same time, I am saying that it makes the deal a lot more smooth when you have people willing to work with each other. In many cases, as a seller, you're also going to be a buyer when you sell that property. And you want the seller, when you buy a property, to work with you. So remember, as a seller, it makes sense to be fair and reasonable and try to work with deals and put them together. And it's also helpful to work with a professional real estate agent. In this case, that agent can actually take all the stress off of you, where you're not even realizing what's happening with the negotiation. That's what you're hiring that agent to do, is help you with that negotiation, make it, less stressful and make it a smooth process. But those are mistakes that I often see sellers make when going through the process. So if you're considering selling your property, do me a favor, consider those. It will make the process a lot more enjoyable and at the end of the day, hopefully net you more money on the sale of your home. But if you are one of those sellers that is also a buyer, or maybe you're just a buyer watching, see what mistakes sellers shouldn't make, check out this video here where I talk about the mistakes of going through the home buying process and what to avoid. But for now, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. I appreciate all the support. Hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.